I'm a data geek. Always was when I was a marketing person, and I certainly brought all of that into my role when I moved into HR. I shared one example of how we looked at data in my last role, specifically looking at where there were holes or gaps or zeros, as we called them, meaning there were no people of color, no women in certain groups, and how we looked at the only ones. But there are so many different ways to look at data, and for those curious minds, and certainly for conversations with leaders, I think when you're able to use data to tell a story, it makes a difference. And whether that's because you have a robust system to rely upon, or you are relying on spreadsheets, as we heard from many HR teams, that's just the tool they have. There's still a way to tell a story through data. And so this next panel is all about that. They're going to talk about how you can look into data and how you can allow data to tell you about the past, present, and future of your workforce. So Bruce Marble, who is the co-founder and CEO of Employee Cycle, will moderate the discussion between agency HR and talent leaders, Rowan, who is from Horizon Media, and Melissa, who's from 72 and Sunny, as they share how they're better leveraging data and using it in their workforce and in their discussions, and how that's changed the shape and nature of what they do. So up next are your panelists.
I'll take this step. Good idea. Oh, you okay?
All right. Thank you all for staying. I don't have to moderate by myself. So, thank you. Oh, here we go. This is great. So I'm honored to moderate this panel. These two very intelligent and forward-thinking HR leaders. So thank all of you for still being here, and everybody that's watching us on Facebook. Hello, how you doing? So let's get right into it. First question I have for you. What's your relationship with HR data? Where do you sit with the data? What's going on with the data? What are you doing?
Yeah. So at 72 and Sunny, data for the talent practice has always been, really central to what we do and how we look at our talent strategy. Prior to implementing Workday, which is our HRIS system now, it was a manual process. As Keisha mentioned, I know that's, I've worked at places where that was the case, or we had systems that didn't really work for us. And so anyway, but we made do, Excel sheets and Google Sheets and figuring it out. Now with Workday, it's been so much easier and just so much faster. For us, ultimately, I think, data is so critical to developing our strategies, developing our programs, being able to really think fast and quick about, what's going on in the organization and how we move. But it never replaces common sense. So, our talent team, is always on the ground with the people. Every meeting, every experience with an employee is really data for us. And then once we're able to hear and see what's happening, we might have an instinct on, hey, wait a minute, something going on in the organization. We're now lucky enough to say, okay, let's pull some reports and let's look at some numbers so that we can really, gut check what we're hearing and seeing on the ground.
And what is your specific role with the data? How are you working with data at your company?
Yeah. So as the talent director in New York, I'm definitely responsible for looking at what's happening in the agency. And, generally speaking, I think typically we're looking at, departures, open head count, again, and then as it relates to departures, like the why around that. So why are people leaving? What is it about that? How fast are we growing? And then the other big thing is our diversity goals, and that's something that we're looking at very closely month to month, and certainly on a quarterly basis to see, we have specific focus areas, and so we're always drilling down on like, how are we doing? These are our benchmarks, this is what we want to move the needle on. And so, like I said, month to month, and then specifically quarterly, we look at, did we move the needle? Are we getting better? Are there certain populations that we're trying to grow? Are they leaving, and why?
Okay. Rowan, same question for you. How is your specific role responsible for working with the data? How do you interact with data personally?
Right, so it's interesting because, so Melissa is the end user, I'm the person and the owner of the data. So my role is the HR operations, and what we typically do is we look at creating reports, understanding the needs, understanding the system, which we typically own Workday post the implementation, and that's the system that we're on. And then we provide the data to our stakeholders. So it's a little bit of a different dynamic and perspective, but we work with our business partners, we work with our stakeholders and executives to understand what and how they want to see the data.
So we want to make this as interactive as possible because this is almost over. And so let's just wake up and ask you some questions, all right? So by a show of hands, who is responsible for working with HR data? Okay? Show of hands. Who has ever been told that HR doesn't know what the hell they're doing with data? Okay, all right. All right, by a show of hands, where are you in regards to using data? So if you're not tracking anything at all, raise your hand. All right, that's great. All right, if you're running reports, but you're not really getting any insights from them, meaning you're just running them week after week, month after month, but not really looking at them, raise your hand. All right. What about you who's actually running the reports and analyzing the data, but not doing anything with it? So you're running the reports, you analyze it, but you're really not making any actions off of the data. You just want to see where you all are. Okay, so then all of you must be super data driven. So then raise your hand if you're actually running reports, analyzing the data, getting insights, and then actually making decisions from the data. All right, great. All right, so we have a mixed crowd. So, can you provide us a short timeline of how long both of your organizations have actually been using HR data, and what did that evolution look like? So when you really first started digging your hands into the data and really figuring out what do we want to do, how are we going to transform our HR department to a data-driven function, what did that look like?
I can start. So we at Horizon have historically used HR data, but our true HR transformation story began in 2014 when we started looking at different vendors and systems other than ADP, which is an outsourcing vendor, if any of you know about it. And the only reason why we decided to move away from ADP was because they were decommissioning their recruiting system. So it began the driver of us assessing other systems, and in 2015, the end of 2015, we went live with a cloud solution, Workday. And we went completely from relying on an outsourcer to processing everything in-house. And that happened in a span of a year. So we took on a lot of our payroll processes, for example, the administration, the benefits of it. We did recruiting as part of Workday, onboarding, pre-boarding, so a lot of the compensation as well as in the system. And that was mainly our core system for Horizon.
Yeah, so I've only been at 72 and Sunny for just over a year, so I don't have the longest view. But prior to, so when I joined, we had implemented Workday about 6 months prior. So I was just reaping the benefits of that when I joined. But prior to that, it was, like I said, a lot of Google Sheets, a lot of hacking together information. And I think the big change has been, getting a system like Workday and having really easy access and fast access is, it's not as manual, so you can really quickly say, okay, let's run those numbers, let's pull those reports. It is so user friendly that, I can do it. There's a team in LA that, takes a global perspective on data, so I can always gut check and ask them for help. But, as a talent director in New York, if there's something happening in my office, I can quickly go to that system and look at it and say, okay, what does this look like? And similar to Horizon, we are now able to do recruiting through the system, we do onboarding, We don't do all of our surveys through the system, but we do departure surveys, which again is really helpful when we're looking at turnover. We can pull reports on those actual surveys to see, again, what are the top reasons that people are leaving and all of the context. We do all of our compensation changes, and I think that's it. But that's mainly the system that we're working in.
So everyone has always heard that companies want to be data-driven, right? Every company wants to be data-driven. So I'm curious, from the perspective of both of you being in HR and talent management, how do you look at your department in comparison to other departments at your organization? Mm-hmm. So you have finance, you have marketing, sales-ish. I know sales gets weird in agencies, but you have other departments that are bringing data to the CEO or the president of the organization. So from an HR function, where are your departments in comparison to other departments being data-driven? As data-driven, less, more? What does that look like?
Yeah, I think, as an organization, we're really focused on impact, and we've always measured our results for clients, from a data perspective. Mm-hmm. And I don't think talent has been any different. I think, again, our sort of evolution and change has just been more quicker, faster. So, last year there was a situation where my leadership said, I think we feel like recruitment's slow, and we're not getting people in the door fast enough, and something's going on with that, and it was interesting to hear that, because my perspective, I oversee that team. I thought, wow, I think we are getting people in, and so it was a great moment. Instead of saying, you're right, I'm wrong, or just going on a feeling, or just an observation, we were saying, let's look at really what's going on. We could look at our candidate pools, our speed to get people to hire, again, turnover, open head count. And so when we piece it all together, it actually wasn't a recruitment problem. So I think for us, that to me is just, and that happened within the span of 3 days, between pulling numbers, putting a few slides together and presenting that back. And I think 2 years ago, or for my previous places, who knows what that conversation would have been like, or how long that would have taken for us to get back to them and say, actually, it's not a recruitment problem, it's it's another problem.
Okay.
For us, for Horizon, each department uses their data differently, and we have historically and have been providing data and leveraging for our needs, like HR and also the business. However, I want to say the way that we develop reports right now is so much easier. In the past, we used to rely, when we had ADP, on their format and the way that they extracted the data. They would give it to HR, and that was very time consuming because we had to start analyzing the data the way we want to see it. But now that we have Workday, the beauty of it is that everything is stored in the system, and you are able to slice and dice the data that you want to see it, and also customize reports for your own needs. The other thing when we went live with Workday, we had a reporting and analytics strategy. So when we went live with the system, we realized that we can't do everything at once. So in 2015 into 2016, we took a lot of our current reporting and moved it into the system. So right now, all you have to do is just type in the name of the report, it gets pulled out, and you have all the data that you want to see it. And it's actually great, especially when you're doing compliance reporting, and those are your yearly annual reporting, and it's time consuming, but you have it in the system. The other thing that we started doing is, in 2016, is really take advantage of Workday, which is developing dashboards, and I know you guys are interested and look at it and how we develop them. But the way that you do the dashboards is you take a lot of complex reports and you build them in a way that summarizes it for your users. And we roll them out to leadership, and that is the beauty of it. So they can go in right now and look at, for example, our headcount, and they can view it in a couple of different pieces where they can look at an overview. But if they have a question or want to drill down deeper into a specific number and analyze it themselves, specifically around trends, all they have to do within the system is click a button, and then another report seamlessly gets pulled out, and then they can view the data that the way that they want. And I think from there, we're taking additional complexity to combine more reports, for example, like headcount, recruiting, and turnover, and telling a more deeper story for our leadership and stakeholders.
So I know we talked about this a little bit on our prep call, but you both have talked a lot about Workday.
Yeah.
But what I find interesting about that is when I'm talking and selling to HR professionals every day, and we'll say, what system are you using? They'll say Workday. But then when we ask them, they're really using 30 systems. So for the audience, just so they can understand, depending on what systems they're looking to use, let's just do a quick rapid fire to go through your tech stack to see what that looks like. So payroll, HRIS.
ADP.
We rely heavily on Workday, and we process everything in the system.
Okay.
Workday.
Apple.
We only use ADP for tax files right now.
Okay. ATS.
Workday.
All right. Onboarding.
Workday, pre-boarding too.
Engagement.
SurveyMonkey.
Yeah, we still do Google Forms, yeah.
Okay. Performance management.
Outside the system, Google Forms, saved to Workday, but outside the system.
We have our internal system, but we're exploring at this point other systems.
Okay. And anything for recognition and rewards?
No.
Not in Workday, outside of the system.
Okay. So in regards to how you're putting all this data together, because Rowan, you were just saying how you put these beautiful, great, user-friendly dashboards together, who's doing that? Do you have a dedicated HR analytics team? Do you have an analytics team across your company that just so happens to work on HR? Or is it every single person who's responsible for a function dedicated to that? Meaning, is there a head of engagement and they provide the engagement metrics? Is there a head of recruiting and they provide it and then you compile it all together? What does that look like?
I think it's a combination right now because we do provide a lot of data as a self-service to our leaders, but mainly my team and HR operations leads the reporting and analytics. However, we are finding that because it's such a time-consuming and important function that we need a dedicated person to work on it. And when you start talking about analytics, you are requiring different skill sets to come to the organization, especially to HR, because we are typically not analytical in nature.
Yep.
Within HR, we focus on the topics that we talked about the past, day and a half.
Yep.
And when you start digging into analytics, it's a bigger topic, and it requires individuals to not only look at HR data, but to look at data from the financials perspective. And once you start combining those two together, it tells a bigger story, especially for your C-suite. And that's the data that they really care about. So we're looking at adding a different team just to specifically look at analytics and combine the different sources of data from various departments so that we can leverage it in the future in a better way.
Yeah, we have in our LA office, we have a Rowan in director of operations, specifically in systems, and then we have what I have not seen in other agencies, which is really a great kind of specialized role. She's a director of talent strategy and development, and so she's actually a former planner that joined the talent team a few years ago, and so she's not a tried and true analytics person, but she has that planner background, so that when she's looking at the data, it is about what is the story to tell, like what are we seeing from this, and then she has an analyst that works on her team. So globally, between our chief talent officer, the talent strategist, and our director of operations and systems, they kind of look at the data globally, what trends are happening, what's going on in each office, and then like I said, each talent officer and every office is responsible for their their data, what's happening. But again, we can always tap into the larger team, which is great. So I have access to it. I can look at it. I can report off of it and do what I want, but I can always gut check with them and work with them on, okay, what are the programs, practices, implementations that we're gonna do coming out of this?
Rowan, you said something really interesting. You said HR typically isn't very data savvy or comes from a foundation of using analytics. So one of the things that we've seen, and there's a big trend, I don't know if it's happening in agencies specifically, but just across all companies, where a lot of CEOs or COOs are hiring non-HR business leaders to work in HR because they believe that they understand more about strategy and data. So how do you feel about that? How do you both feel about that? And do you think, if it's a role specifically around HR data, that a non-HR person can do a better job who's really data savvy versus an HR person that may have a huge learning curve to have to learn how to work with data?
I think it's an interesting question, and our CTO, Eileen Benwood, actually, within our HR executive leadership, she has selected leaders with different backgrounds for a different reason, and we do, all of us bring a different experience into HR and how we deliver services to our business and ultimately our employees and people, because we care so much about them. When it comes to data, I think that whether you come from the business or not from the business, we both need to work collaboratively to think about how are we tackling our talent programs and issues that we see within the company. And that is the biggest part. But my observation is that we do good at looking at our data just within HR, but we're not understanding the broader picture when it comes to the business leaders and how they're performing on each account, from profitability, utilization, and other factors that are important to them. And combining HR data and what we look at a typically like every day, or whatever the cadence that you're looking at your data, but you're also combining it with the perspective of your business and what they're looking at from a day-to-day, and the CFO and CEO would be an interesting dynamic and an interesting way to look at the data and be able to provide that strategic direction in the future. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, I think definitely having people with some level of expertise, like I think having an analyst on a team who comes from, has a little bit of training upbringing in that is really helpful. But again, for us, it's like, we're not like reinventing the wheel. Like it's, yes, will we progress and how we do this and what we look at? Definitely. But I think for now, there are some real fundamentals that we're always looking at from a talent perspective and what's affecting the organization that, any talent person, worth their weight is going to be able to, it's not rocket science either. So, I can pretty quickly look at something and say, okay, what's going on? And great to have, like I said, on our team, the talent strategist who I can work with to build that story and tell that story. So we've certainly benefited from people with different perspectives and different, experiences. But again, for us, it's so much about, it's not like we're just sitting at our desks, like saying, what's the report going to tell us? We really are on the ground with people and experiencing what's happening. And so I definitely want to be able to say, like, people are leaving like it feels like people are leaving for X, Y, and Z reason, and then I use that data to really kind of gut check and verify what I'm seeing and experiencing on the ground.
You said this should be a collaborative for everyone in the audience who's really interested in figuring out, you know what, you're right, I should be working with someone else, the CFO, CIO, COO, CEO. Who should HR be working with and learning from the most to start tying these metrics to financial business outcomes? Would that be the CFO? Would that be the chief creative director? Would that be the person who's in charge of a specific business line? What does that look like for you? And who are you working with to make sure that as you're growing the talent business, that actually is really affecting the true ROI of the overall business?
Yeah, I think for me and for most of our offices, we start with our management team. And that's usually representative of, head of strategy, executive creative directors, our managing director, and our head of production. And, because they touch, the entire agency, and because they're, the most influential people in the building, that's our first point of contact in terms of like, okay, this is what we're seeing, this is what we're hearing. Again, in terms of our diversity goals, like, these are people that manage, other people who manage other people. So if we want to make the greatest level of impact, that's where we start. And then we kind of figure out from there, okay, who else do we need to be working with? To your point, depending on what it is, it could be the CFO, it could be other people, but that's typically our first go-to is the management team to really, help them understand what's happening, and then talk together about like what are the solutions, what's the plan, what are the programs, that kind of thing.
I agree with Melissa. My first usually point of contact is, in Horizon we call them community talent managers, which is the business partners. So a person like Melissa, and they typically go to their business leaders and ask questions as needed. But when you're developing, it depends on the report, right? But if you're developing a report that's mainly for the business, go and ask them. Like, is this working? Mock up something and then show them, will this work for you and why doesn't it? And provide them timeline where they can just go in and look at the data and figure out what's wrong. Like we gave them, for example, turnover data because we care so much about it. And one of the leaders came back and said, you know what? Those people aren't, like, I wanted them out. Like, I don't know if this is the way that we should be reporting on turnover. And that gave us additional insight because we went back and we started thinking, we have data, but are we presenting the right data right now? And that came up with a different issue and a different perspective, which was very interesting. And different leaders have different thoughts. And you don't have to take everybody's feedback and come up with a report. Eventually, you're just going to understand that there's a common theme and hear it. But my biggest partners are finance. I work very closely with finance to develop the profitability reports, any overtime utilization. How are we billing our clients? How are we doing from account to account? And that is very insightful for our business leaders. And once you combine it with HR data, I think it just tells a big story, and they can compare their data across their different accounts, but also different departments.
So what are the 3 top areas where you're tracking data, you're measuring what's going on with the data?
Yeah.
And how did you decide what those top 3 were?
Yeah, for us, I think, again, it's, always about who we bring into the organization in terms of our open head count, what those positions are. It just helps us like quarter to quarter, year to year to see like, the growth, what's happening, what are the different roles. There's more creative than strategy, whatever that means. Then I think definitely our retention rates, so are people staying, are people going? Was this a year of a lot of change, and what does that look like? So turnover. And again, for us, our brand citizenship mission is to expand and diversify the creative class. And so we have, year to year, we have areas of focus. And so we're looking at women in leadership roles and women in creative roles across the board. And then Black and African American and Hispanic Latino in all roles across the agency, and especially in leadership roles. So we look at that again, quarter to quarter to see, okay, how are we tracking on those metrics? And that with the turnover and all of that, plus that is really like, that's the current, kind of top priority list for us.
Okay.
For us, turnover as well. I think every person in this industry cares about turnover a lot, and we care about knowing how we're performing compared to other agencies, which I find it, by the way, very difficult because we can't find benchmark metrics anywhere except if you want to do it within your network. Recruiting and how fast we're hiring, what levels. So we created awesome dashboards that you can see where we're recruiting, what's our highest recruiting, and also comparing it with our turnover, because we have been seeing a lot of trends based on how fast we're hiring and growing, but also how what's happening with our turnover. So we track those 3 areas very closely. And diversity, we just have a different team that typically just looks at this data, and we're growing in that space as well, diversity inclusion.
Let's dig into turnover a little bit. How are you tracking turnover specifically? Overall turnover, turnover by department, turnover by gender, first year turnover, 3, 6 months, you're breaking it out quarterly.
That's a good question because you can skew your turnover data. The way that
Right.
if you want to lower your turnover data, you do it. You take the beginning year and then end of year head count and you just do your turnover, but it gives you a lower number. I think the right way of doing it is your average. Depending on your company, because we at Horizon, we're such a growing company and we have been growing, touch wood, like tremendously. So we look at our average and then we account for how much did we have for that specific year.
Okay.
Yeah, and like Ruwan mentioned, and maybe I'm reading into this, but one of the managers said, like about the turnover number, like I wanted those people to leave, so we look at it by discipline, and then overall, and then we also do regrettables and non-regrettables. So ultimately, we do go through the list and say, okay, were these people that we were really sorry to see go, or were these folks that, needed to move on and maybe there was a performance issue, or maybe it was just, time for them to go. So we look at it that way. Then we look at involuntary and voluntary. So
too.
there's, all those different kinds of ways to look at it.
And I think one of the presentation earlier today, they were talking about the investment of having employees that you don't want to retain and what does it cost you from an investment perspective. And that's a really important metric that we want to focus on in the future, because we just used regrettable, non-regrettable, voluntary, involuntary, but you also need to start thinking of turnover in a different way. So what we're trying to do is looking at where do we know at what levels we're expecting turnover, and how much are we investing resources and costs associated with those groups, and is it worth it, and what can we do differently? And when we started to look at that data and understand it from that perspective, I think the way that we're going to present it to our C-suite is going to tell a completely different story, because right now we only focus in HR. This is our average turnover throughout the year, or we're flat, or we're higher, we're lower by location, and these are the reasons. But I think we're at a point in our industry that we need to look at it a little bit differently, with a different lens, and accept that, at certain levels, for certain reasons, we are okay having this much turnover or not.
So there were only a few people in the audience that raised their hand when I said, are you actually making actions based off of the data? And it seems like a lot of people might not be there. So how are you actually looking at the data, running the reports, analyzing it, and then not just saying, oh, this is cool, or this is what's going on, but actually turning that into something where you can perform an action and actually impact the business?
Yeah. So I think we use it to inform our training and development programs, and decisions. So, which has really helped too. I think, for training and development, I've been involved and not involved for many years over my career, and I think sometimes, again, without the data or without the that informed decision, you can do a lot of things and maybe they're not really making the best impact. So I think having an understanding of, again, what's happening in the organization from a data perspective, and then being able to say, okay, this is why we need to implement this training, and this is why we think it's going to have a lot of impact. And so we've done things like that. I think in terms of, sort of policies and programs, one thing that comes to mind is, and this was internal data, but also really supplemented by industry data, was around women and men at a certain age where they're starting to think about kids, and seeing in our own organization people leaving, as was just talked about in the last session, and again, looking at the industry and seeing that we're losing a lot of women and parents to trying something different or staying at home when they have a new child. And so I think the data on that really helped us to make a case to leadership around our parental leave. And we were actually able, I was just telling Rowan, we have 6 months of paid leave at 72 and Sunny. Yeah, it's 3 months
It's all
fully paid, and then the next 3 months at 50% pay, but the whole leave is with job protection. So we're
Wow, let's give a hand.
really-
Thanks for that.
Yeah, so it's things like that where again we're able to tell that story and make that case, which has been really impactful.
Great.
I'm going to give an example because I think it's valuable. So for us right now, we are looking, for example, at our retention rate and what can we do differently in terms of how we promote people or keep people within the company, and what are the reasons why they're leaving. So because we have a lot of that data within our system, we are looking at just generally all the job titles across the different departments, and are we doing ourselves justice by having too many job titles or less than job titles. But it gives you an overview when you look at it from the system, and then we are comparing it, for example, across management level, across department, across their compensation, and what do we typically give them in terms of increases and their average tenure. But the nice thing about the system as well is that we're comparing it with our recruiting activity and how long we're spending time at each management level interviewing people and spending time with them in terms of leveraging our tools and our investment and resources, and combining that as a cost as well from our lens, because we never looked at it this way. And we are seeing some issues and some trends in certain areas, and how it's helping us is it's informing our business partners and HR, especially talent, and how we're going around with training and recruiting in the future. And I think it's very instrumental, because I know the data doesn't tell everything, but at the same time, it was the first time where we as an HR leadership came together and started seeing it from a different perspective. It's like we had no idea we invest 20,000 hours just interviewing entry-level employees. What are we doing? And what should we do differently? But those insights are helpful because you tweak how you think about your investments and costs associated with each program.
And then let's end on this. We had a panel or a session earlier that was called Let's Be Honest. So right now we're telling a lot of great rainbow, unicorn stories, and this is amazing, but let's end on lessons learned. Where did you mess up? How did you mess this up? What did you underestimate in regards to how long this was going to take, so that for some of the people out here, they can say, you know what, oh yeah, I did that too, or oh, I'm not going to do that.
Yeah, I think, again, just because of my tenure and experience with the integration process, I'm not trying to be perfect. But
She had a pleasant one.
I don't have horror stories, only because, again, I wasn't there when they were on the ground developing this thing. I think for us, it is important to think about who is the team that's supporting this. Having someone like Rowan with experience and experience and a knowledge base, and to say, oh, watch out for this, let's do that, make sure we look at it this way. I think if you don't have that, just in your bench, then you're gonna see some pitfalls. I mean, again, the good thing about the system is that there's been so many things along the way where we've said, oh, we should really be, we should add this, we should, be looking at that. And it's nice, in other systems I've used, it's like, nope, we can't customize it. Nope, we can't do that, which is really the opposite. So I think as we've gone, it's been great to have that flexibility to say, you know what, we didn't think about that when we built it, but we can now add it, and as we're using it and testing it. But I think thinking about the team that you have is really important. We were talking about, we had consultants early on, or at least again for the 6 months that I started using it, and they were awesome. So that was really, in addition to our internal team, we had outside consultants that we could call. And my joke was, when I started, they said, don't worry, Melissa, get in there and break, you can break anything, we can fix it. And well, I pretty much broke everything, and they were like, remember when you started, you broke everything? I said, you told me I could break everything, and anyway, but they were great. We could get them on the phone. They would do a webinar. They'd call us, and we'd just get it fixed, you know. And it wasn't like, oh my gosh, and we can't make this compensation change, and everything was delayed. So I think thinking about that, you know, who's your implementation partner outside of who's in your current organization? That would be my thing.
So yeah, give us some war stories.
So ours, we did it a lot differently because we decided, as I mentioned, to go from ADP to a cloud solution, and then we went from outsourcing to let's do everything on our own. So we had a lot of great lessons learned, and honestly, if anybody's going through an implementation, especially to a cloud-based solution, tap into my talent. But I'm going to walk you through the different phases and real quick give some recommendations. The first phase is before you're looking at your vendors and assessing them, have a good case to your CEO or board of directors and stakeholders, and let them buy into why you are moving away from whatever you're doing currently to the future. Because you need their buy-in along the way. It's not going to all be pretty, especially post-implementation. When you're assessing your vendors, make sure that you have a good deployment partner, and a partner that explains to you the journey. Our partner that we picked, they were like, everything's easy, you know, we're just gonna take what you have and move it into the system. And I think that's a it's not gonna be successful deployment. What the partner needs to tell you in terms of deployment is that they need to look at 3 aspects: your people, your process, and technology, and blend them together as part of your design. And also when you're designing your system, as an executive, you need to start thinking about what new roles and skills are required for your team, because it's a completely new change. And I know we talked about the first day about change management, but do not underestimate change management and training. I think you need a dedicated person or a team to just do that throughout the design and then the implementation and post-implementation. Another thing, and this is more philosophical, and it's disruptive, especially when you're in that position, but think about those tough questions and ask yourself and share them with others. Like, does payroll really needs to live in HR? Does it work for us? Or do we think it should be with finance because they're just financially driven? Does analytics need to live in HR? Or do we develop a group outside of HR that looks at analytics just holistically? What strategies do we have right now that are time consuming and we can outsource them and not keep them in-house, such as administration of leave or certain training programs, because other vendors might do them better. And because it's very time consuming, the implementation is gonna take a lot of your time as well. And always be ready to replan. That's my advice. Nothing is going to go as planned, and be okay with the fact that you might be able to pilot certain things in different groups, or if you're global, certain countries, before you go a big bang approach. And always when you're providing guidance to your team, just think of the end goal, and it will help them design your processes, your reporting, anything within the system and within your tools in a much better and more efficient way.
So I know we're out of time, but maybe we can sneak in a couple questions before Keisha gets up.
Yeah.
Right. I know I was specifically told to wait for the microphone, or they were never going to invite me back.
Hello. We currently, about 6 months ago, we moved away from ADP into Workday as well, so super excited to hear that you guys are both on it. It's really messy, but it's exciting. I think it's pretty intuitive. A couple of questions for you. I love to hear the team that needs to go into it. Right now, it's just one system analyst, and that's not enough to support our entire organization for analytics. But 2 questions. One, what type of predictive analysis or reporting are you doing? I'm hearing a lot of real-time data, turnover, things like that. But what are you doing for future state reporting? And then are you also doing any type of like wage parity reporting in Workday?
I can answer that. Wage parity, yes, we do. Predictive, we're right now descriptive, and it's because we are looking at past trends and we're starting to predict the future. But you need good data and clean data. So I hope when you guys converted your data, it was pretty clean, because when we converted our data post 2015, it was a dump of what we had and we did not clean it as much. Our conversion strategy was not the best and we didn't think it through. And so right now when we're looking at trends, we're limited with 2 years.
That's exactly right.
Yeah. So honestly, if you're thinking about becoming predictive within a year of implementing a new system like Workday, make sure that my best recommendation, make sure that your conversion strategy is on point.
All right. Well, thank you very much for being brave souls. Hopefully you're able to get home. Thank you. Thank you. Great.